everyone. One of them is going to be the slides, so if you guys want to keep any of it or share it to anyone else that didn't show up, or you find something that resonates with you, keep it. And the other one is just a quick demo website. That's just pretty much a static website, proof of concept of what theoretically we should be able to do by the end of it. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. That is the wrong one.
Sweet.
All right. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Is the audio like cutting out just for me, or is it for everyone?
I said my internet was unstable right there, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're
I think
good
that
now.
was the issue.
My
Sorry.
bad.
No, you're good. Yeah, if you guys have any issues, just talk about it or speak up. Or like if you guys have any questions at all, just feel free. It's pretty loose conversation. It's just really a discussion on the topic, and you're meant to have questions over this, just to get some knowledge. So, and so building a web server from scratch.
Hey,
This is
wait,
my
what's your
introduction
name?
here.
Okay, Evan.
Yeah. I'm Evan Watson, class of 2020 here at IU, major in informatics, a minor in business. I was an undergraduate instructor for C200 with Teresa. I'm not sure who all here has taken it yet. Highly recommend the course though, great people. You learn a lot. My current work now is just doing some startups with some people I met at IU. We did capstone projects, found out that we had some really good ideas for it and we really want to get on with it. Also doing full stack development for a PhD student at IU. I signed an NDA for that though, so I can't talk too much on that for right now. Okay, and I'd like to start presentations just understanding what the concept is and also, giving you purpose. So why should you care when watching this? So uh, by the end of this, you want to know how to host your own personal website, or at least get to know where to go for that. Gain insight on system infrastructure on the web server, understanding the full stack, become familiar with important concepts for potential job interviews. So someone comes and asks you, what kind of stuff you need for a server, how to get into servers, accessing it, good etiquette, stuff like that. Create a website with endless potential. This is just the web server. You can do anything with it. You can host your own website. I put, portfolios up, any kind of website you'd want. Applications can go on there. You can make stuff for your apps on your phone. Anytime data wants to transfer, make databases, stuff like that. So let's talk about servers. So here's a broad overview of the framework of a server. We're not going to talk about all of this today. What we're really just going to talk about is this part of the flow diagram of the DNS, not really the load balancer, but this web server section, a little bit about the media files and stuff like that. Highly recommend you look at all this. This is great. This is what started me when I had to first make my website this summer. Getting familiar with all these key terms just to know where to search and look up stuff. This is all important information when you're wanting to make a proper website. Building a server versus renting server space. So building a server can be done on most computers here. All it's going to do is you have to download software for it, like Apache, Nginx, or XAMPP. If you guys aren't familiar with that, just tell me. These are just like softwares where you spin up a server on your computer. You'd make, certain information and that you would need to give access to it, like open HTTP ports and stuff like that. What you basically have to do when building a server is you have to pay up front, meaning you have to pay for the computer, the processor, any of the stuff that the motherboard, storage, a lot of storage potentially that you'd be wanting to do, especially if you're building your own server because you want it to be cost effective. You're probably going to want a lot of storage to use because it'd be cheaper that way. Renting server space, you're leveraging third-party resources. You can remotely access servers within different regions, which is kind of part of those resources. That's a good resource to have, is different geolocations to be under. You can be monthly billed. So instead of paying that high upfront cost, you can be monthly billed at a very cheap price, even though in the long run it might not be cheaper, but to be able to offset that cost now for you can be really beneficial for someone that, doesn't have a huge company to support them. So building and renting a little more, this is just more of a item list of it. The pros of building it, you get that full control. You can decide what kind of or hardware you want to put into that machine. What do you think is going to make it faster? You can personalize it for the kind of data transferring that you're going to be doing. Highly customizable for that. Cost efficient in the long run, like I was explaining. Some of the cons, though, servers must be running at all times. High maintenance, it can be done on servers, especially if you got a lot of data going on. Especially if you're new with computers, you're not going to know what the problem might be at first. Could take a long time before it gets fixed for you. So if the website's not like very important, or you're very sure that whatever you're working on will not have power outages or something like that, then you could think about building. High maintenance, high upfront cost, and a lot of experience is needed. I mean, you got to understand the hardware, all the software, a lot of the stuff needs to be connected for you. Then the renting, which is a lot easier nowadays. I was talking to some of the people before this that, third parties out there, they just want to give you this stuff for almost like nothing, just to start. They'll give you like free accounts that you can set up, very cheap. I mean, I pay $5 a month for the cheapest base. We'll talk about later. But anyways, they take care of the actual maintenance of the hardware itself. you know, they give you great customer support out there. You can learn a lot from the FAQs. Pay as you go. Little experience needed. I mean, I had literally none before starting it, but with the help of their documentation that they have and people that I asked around, I learned a lot real fast. You get more assets to utilize, like I was saying, those geolocation, different servers in different areas, better for people if you're going all around the world, stuff like that, depending on what your product be. Cons, you don't really have any control of that hardware. They get to decide what they're going to put in those machines, where they're going to put it, all that stuff. And it's going to be probably higher cost in the long run. And I'm talking about like really long run, a couple years for sure. These are some of the server providers that I found out very useful over the summer. DigitalOcean is my favorite. It's what I do all mine on. It's pretty affordable, great documentation, easy interface to work with. You could use Netlify for a free website if you're just trying to host like a quick resume portfolio thing. You're not going to learn much about the back end. You don't really touch any of that stuff. It's just a good interface for you to host websites, and there's a free account for static files that you can put up there. I shared the PowerPoint with you, so if you guys want to look into these a little more, you can. Feel free to. There's different kind of things. You got to meet what your needs are. There's a lot out there, though. Amazon Web Service is the biggest one. I mean, big tech giants like Netflix, whole bunch of companies run off of AWS, and it's very expensive. It's very confusing right away. I mean, it's really confusing, but you'll probably want to utilize one of their assets, some kind of asset of theirs, like the S3 or E2s, stuff like that. So step one, to making a website for yourself, you want to register a domain. I use Porkbun, real cheap. It's a yearly cost usually, and this just gives you authority over that domain. Then you would make an SSH key. I'm not sure if anyone here knows what an SSH key is, but it's very important. You get a public and a private key, and I'll go over a quick demo here real quick. If you have PuTTY installed, there's a thing called PuTTyGen that you can use here. And what it'll do is it'll help you create one of these kinds of keys. An RSA is what I use. It's what most people will use. But there's different options here that you can use. And again, this is another topic you might want to, if you're interested in looking a little more. But basically, you can go here and generate a key. It makes you move your mouse around. Give me one sec. And there it is, it's made. And then here you would sign some kind of a password for you, and then you confirm the password. and then a private and a public key gets saved to your device. So maybe I'm going a little too fast because this is a concept that I didn't really know at first. People were asking me to give them a SSH key. I wasn't sure what that was. Like I've only used username and passwords to access servers and stuff through IU. They don't make you use SSH for as a student at least. But you would just go into here and then you would have, you would type in PuTTY. But when you download PuTTY, PuTTYGen should all be installed for you, and this is where you would make that key. And inside of here, you can either save the public key or the private key here. The public key is what you would share to whoever owns the server. You could email them or whatever. It doesn't really matter if anyone accesses it. It's just a way to connect to your private key. So what you need to keep secret though is that private key, and that's why it's so secure. It can only be whoever has this private key, which is really long. You can see right here, this is the whole thing for this one key. I'm not going to save it, so I'm not worried about showing you guys, but don't ever show it. Don't ever share it, screen share it or anything. This is what will make your website really secure. It's one of the best things that you can use to keep a website secure. Okay, go to the next slide. Again, if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to shout out.
You also put them in the
All
chat
right.
if you want.
Hmm?
I'm saying they can put them in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, and then third step that you'll do is create a LAMP droplet. This is if you use DigitalOcean. So let me pull up this DigitalOcean. Wait, here it is.
You have a question in the chat from Geek.
Oh, okay, let me see here. Okay, so the PuTTY thing is, so when you're talking about PuTTYGen is just creating this that for you. It's not connecting you to any server. It's not giving you any reference to that server. What'll happen is that, so there's a certain file, a hidden file that's under the server, which I don't think I can show you guys mine just because this is my actual one, but I don't know if you know what hidden files are, but they're like .ssh is what it'd be called. And under there you have certain, you can save these keys under there, and it'll look at when you sign. Okay, here, let me also pull up PuTTY. When you go into here to actually sign in, here, let me actually close my current one, then I'll just sign into that server real quick. So I already have one saved here, but if you go over to SSH over on the left side here, and you hit this plus button, then you go to this auth section. In here, you can put in the private key, which this is my private key right here. You can save that under here, and then it'll take you back over to this session that you're in, and you put in the host name that you're wanting to work in. So I have root. I work under root because I'm the owner of it, and I want to have root access to it all. And then I have certain, well, actually I gotta load this, it'd be better. And then this is our website that we'll be on today, is my evanwatson.net. It's just my generic website that I paid for that just has some stuff that I want to showcase to future employers. But you can open in here. It says I'm using username root, and then it's authenticating my public key. And now it's asking for my passphrase for that key that I made. And so it's looking at my private key here, and it's looking at that public key that I've put into the server already previously. So you have to have access to your server already to put it up. Yeah, that's a good point to have for the RSA. Okay. And Yeah, so then you would log in right here, just using that password. Okay. I hope that answered your question.
Yep.
Sweet. Okay, let me get rid of this. Okay, so for the next step, you'd want to create a LAMP droplet. The droplet is just a name for DigitalOcean for these for that server space, basically. It's called other stuff and other things, but just for our purposes, I'm just going to call it droplet just so it's a little easier for the concept. The LAMP is what a lot of people practice to have a good server. So to have Linux, which is an open source operating system that I'm sure a lot of you probably are familiar with by now. It's just basically you can run commands off of it. Apache, which would be where you run your server, and that's what's going to give other people access to this web server that you're running, and open ports and things like that. MySQL, which is a database that you'd want, so this would help store the data, and then also giving you the ability to retrieve the data. And then the PHP, which would be the tool that you use to actually retrieve that data through writing the scripts for it. So if you go into here, let me just actually go into a new droplet. I'll show you guys a little bit. So right here, you can get started with a droplet. And in here, you can choose all the different kinds of OS and other things, software that you'd want to use. You go under this marketplace here. And these are some of the other things that'll just install for you when you run this server. So it's just easier. It does proper like file management for you and just good techniques that you might not be familiar with right away to just spin a quick server up. You would pick this LAMP right here, and then you can pick which plan you want to run off of here. And the cheapest here is $5 a month, which is really affordable. And it gives a vertical and horizontal scaling, so you can get storage. You can increase your storage, or you can increase your processing, or whatever kind of stuff you need to improve that they give you access to here. And then here, which is one of the great resources that you can have different regions that you can put this server under. I put mine usually in New York just because it's a reliable place so far. Amsterdam, San Francisco, a whole bunch of other places they got, and they're growing too. This is a pretty new resource to have, but they're doing a really great job compared to like Amazon Web Service and stuff like that. And then here, this is where you'd pick SSH key. You can use password kind of like IU does when you're logging into Burrow and all that, which makes it easier, but you don't get it as nearly as secure as using SSH key, because you need that password and you need the username, but you also have to have the actual key on your device. So as long as you don't share that with anyone, you should be fine. And then there's some other stuff here. You can create your host name. This is just a good way to look at it. And then they have these things called tags, which just helps you manage multiple resources under a server. And it's a little more complicated that I don't really want to explain. But you can then create this droplet, and that's basically it. They give you that server space right away. I mean, it's instant. They give it to you right there. And then you would then hook up your host name. So if you go over to this networking section right here, you can then register certain domain names. This gives me like ibought.evanwatson.net. You would then register it here, and then they'll give you some. Yeah, I'll just go into here. These right here are name servers, is what they're called, and this is what you need to connect to your domain name. So go to that porkbun.com, you could use GoDaddy as well. That's a pretty big one, but it's not as affordable. I find this to be the cheapest. They don't take such a high commission off of it, and the other resources that you need, they don't really charge you on, whereas GoDaddy would. And my Wi-Fi is a little slow here. Yeah, I'll just wait for that load. But you need these name servers basically just to hook up to to give consent to this company that's housing your domain name that bought it from the proper authorities for it. So after that's all set and you've downloaded it all, the Linux and the Apache, MySQL, and PHP should all be softwares that are already installed into your server. It does most of that work for you. So then if you guys want to just go to that site real quick, this is just what I hosted under my, here, I'm going to stop sharing real quick so I can log into my server for you guys. Alrighty. Okay, so I used my SSH key and I logged into my server here. And basically this is just a good look at the Linux. It's just like Linux here. If you've ever worked with that, Ubuntu, stuff like that, all you do is run certain commands and you can find out all those for yourself. I definitely highly recommend looking it up, but you can also go over here to WinSCP, which I like to use. I'm more of a visual person that likes to look at it all. A lot of people can just do it off of Linux and look at the file structure, but I prefer just having a visual representation of it, and it's easier to just drag and drop for me because I'm using laptop. And this is just some of the stuff so this is right here is the current directory that we're under. And this is where anything that you upload under this section, like right away, I'm pretty sure this should all be accessible. So if you start a server up, you should just be able to drop a file. It'll start with index.html, and that's by default what will load under your website without this like Evan Watson. It'll just be var www, and then you'll have an index in here. But then I added like these different directories that gives different extensions for that. And this is just the file structure for that current website that's being hosted right here. And that's just kind of gives proof of concept to it. Now, the things that you can do on this server is anything you can really do on your computer, you can just do on here. You can, make those HTML files, you make the JS and all that, and just upload it to that server. You can access MySQL from in here, all that good stuff. It also has PHP and stuff like that already installed, which is kind of cumbersome if you don't have it by default. It takes a while for all that. Present again. So good techniques to secure a website. By default, DigitalOcean, probably a lot of other people give you a firewall that should be installed by default. It shouldn't have any other things that you have to do for that. Make sure that only the correct ports are open. So that's a big thing when you work with servers or having different ports open. The main ones are the HTTP port and the HTTPS. And then some extra security stuff is getting an SSL certificate. That's how you get HTTPS onto your website to show that it's secure, which is important if you have, accounts or some kind of money transactions going on, some kind of actual viable product that you're trying to sell through it. That's kind of an important feature to have. Like I would never purchase from a site that doesn't have that. If you go to my website, I even have it and I don't even have an account. It was just kind of a good experience, and it gives that kind of relief to the user. But if you just go right here, this is how you can tell if it's HTTPS, what kind of cookies they take. Google kind of does that good with this browser. And end-to-end encryption, that's kind of more on what you're coding with when you're retrieving and getting data. Make sure it's encrypted. That's a little more on the extreme side. If you're having really sensitive data, then I'd highly recommend that then. And then there's a resource called Cloudflare, which you guys can look up. It's just a concept that I want to put out there for you guys to help with the securing that website and its data. So like I was saying, uploading files, get familiar with the file structure. You don't want to be lost inside of the Linux terminal. I know it can be kind of overwhelming at first. So that's why I kind of like OneSCP. You can understand what files are, where the files are. You could go back easily. You might forget a command in Linux, and it can kind of be, you got to go look up that Linux command, and then you kind of forgot what you're doing. It's just make sure you're familiar with your file structure, and it'll just make you work better. Be sure to add files to those correct directory. Make sure you're uploading the files to that HTML directory, the var and the www. Know your Linux commands. That's a big one for sure. I had to learn like all the Linux commands for this to build it all. There's a lot out there. I mean, you can't know them all, but quite a bit of it. And then returning to this topic of all this information that you need, the DNS, which what we talked about was the domain name. These are load balancers, which you can have if you have multiple resources of web servers. So if you spin different web servers up, you can manage them through a load balancer. And then if you're wanting to make apps, you can make these app servers, which is for like, you make an Android application or server, you want to make a PaaS, platform as a service, that's what you would do. You can get DB cache, which then goes into database, this is where the MySQL basically comes into play, or you can use NoSQL, depending on what you like. This clickstream analysis is more on the business side on how you would analyze data. Like Spark and Hadoop, I've seen that in a lot of job offers lately that people are caring about, that you get familiar with. And this is where you data warehouse based off that Spark and Hadoop stuff, and then you can gather business intelligence from all that. This section right here is what would be important if you're wanting to do streaming, some kind of video streaming, or you have a lot of images that you would think it would be cost effective if you just store it as data. Like if you just find someplace to like use a bucket to just store it all, so that way it's cheaper for you, because it can get really expensive if you start uploading, gigabytes of videos onto this server that you have. So Amazon has some good resources if you know how to utilize it. It's a little tricky though. And then just some good practices that I've learned from this summer. Self-investment, you are your biggest asset. I think that's a big concept to definitely recognize, and I think everyone here should definitely agree with this, because you're here learning an education, spending good money, and spending your time here to learn these things. I think that's great. Definitely be passionate about your work. You don't want to sit there in a project and not really care about what you're doing. You won't really work as good, not as hard as you'd want. Give exceptional documentation. There's not enough documentation out there. I mean, you got to get really granular with it. People just don't really understand the way you code by default. Even if you think you have a really, really good practice of coding, some people just might not get it, and you don't know who the next person who's going to be coding on that project is going to be. So just try and give as much documentation, comments, make a knowledge base file for it. That's important stuff. And especially to employers and like people that don't actually code, if they try and come over and look at your code and they just don't even understand it, like a good practice is just having someone come in. Like we're adding new people to our projects right now, And I just having them look at the knowledge base and making sure that they can understand all of this stuff, because I'm not going to be on this project forever. I don't plan on being it. And a lot of projects nowadays have, agile, and it's supposed to keep getting worked on and have be very layered to it. So just having great documentation really helps with all that. Mobile first design is what I hear a lot of businesses talking about. And I don't mean program for mobile apps first, like writing code for mobile first. What you should do is think about the smallest screen that you're going to be working for and expand on that. So your website looks fluid between all devices. You could start programming on a huge TV, but you should still have that mobile first design. And then also listen to others. And that's pretty easy. I think everyone should understand that. Be respectful of your coworkers and stuff like that. And if someone has an idea, just see where they go with it. You never know what's going to turn up. That's it. That was my presentation.